Afternoon, Second Lifers. For those of you who do not know who I am, in Second Life I'm called Kirsten Lee Cinquetti, and I developed the Kirstens Viewer. I thought it'd be nice just to do a quick video and demonstrate some of the features of the latest beta. Nothing too serious. I'm just going to fire it up and run through a few bits and pieces so you can understand what it's all about. So, generally speaking, our viewer is just aimed at people who want a little bit more out of Second Life and have got the hardware to support it. It doesn't do anything special in terms of like Firestorm with all its quality of life features, but it does try to render the world at its best possible quality for hardware that can support it and is sometimes useful when doing filming because of the visual quality and the speed at which it can render. Now, before I fire it up, a word of warning, your mileage may vary. I'm recording this at nearly 4K, so my frame rate will be extremely different to someone who's, say, rendering at 1440p or sort of 1080p. So bear that in mind. Um, your frame rate will depend on how many pixels you're trying to push. But for the purposes of this video, let's just get stuck right into it and log in. The default skin is Azure 2, which is a blue style of skin. There are 3 other variations. We might, if we got time, pop into those. Let me just stop the audio before it starts screaming at me. Let's see now. First thing you'll notice is the menus. Now this is a choice that you can have. You can either have graphical representations of all the menu features, or you can switch that off. You'll also notice, unlike the Second Life viewer, there's an extra menu here, which are film-centric toggles. Some of them are standard sort of Linden Lab features. Some of them are not. Some of them have been modified to fit the purpose, but there is a film menu there with toggles which are easily available for filmmakers. By default, the advanced menu is always shown, and for those of you who want, there's the develop menu. Changes in this particular beta, the consoles for a kickoff. So the texture console has been overhauled to be a lot clearer and a lot more sort of meaningful as to what's going on. Obviously, you can see as you're camming around the activity and what's going on, it's a lot clearer to see if you've got a stuck texture. Let's have a look now. Debug console will be fairly quiet. Most of the debug settings have been disabled because the console was far too spammy and didn't mean an awful lot. Fast timers. This one has been overhauled. So Linden Lab had a internal mechanism for measuring performance of the viewer, which was with the profile and Tracy system. For S24, we use the internal system so that content creators and filmmakers, when they're building a scene, can actually see where the rendering is going. So each frame is 100%, and in this case takes 8.4 milliseconds to render. And then you can break it down into, you can see the shadows here are currently taking up about 2% of the frame rate. Reflection probes about 2%. You can sort of measure where things are. This has been modernized for this viewer, so it has stuff like GLTF in it and other elements which aren't in the original fast timers. And as you can see, it's a very pretty sort of way of breaking down where everything is going to, like geometry, reflection probes, object culling, rendering of shadows, and the entire frame itself. It's useful for sort of measuring the performance in situations where you've got a complex scene. So let's just pop to the preferences. Very similar to Linden Labs in that respect. We don't change too many things because I like it that people can use the official viewer and then jump into this viewer, and muscle memory and working out where things are is a lot easier if you don't alter things too much. So a lot of stuff like graphics is pretty much the same, is very familiar. Where things do sort of change is stuff like the tone mapper, for instance. By default, in the Linden viewer, you'd only have Aces and Kronos neutral. Here we have the Hable Uncharted 2 tone mapper and the Sony Uchimura tone mapper as well, which I actually prefer with the tone mapping mix. You can see it actually changes on the screen there once you start messing around with it. Everything else within these sort of default menus is pretty much similar. Where things start to differ is if you look here, we've got the S24 core. So these are the sort of things which are slightly custom to our viewer. So the depth of field is subtly different to the Linden Lab version. Code which was originally thought about, which was disabled, has now been developed. So you have stuff like camera f number, the focal length, and the aspect ratio, which allows you to do some really funky sort of effects with the depth of field. And of course, the top of the line sort of anaglyph 3D stuff. So if you've got red blue glasses, it's a single click. And then I'll just put it to daylight so you can see it a bit better. Environment day, let's have a look, midday, boom. You can see everything is red and green. And if you had a pair of 3D glasses on, now everything would be popping out. This has been modified in the beta version of the latest viewer. It can auto adjust the stereoscopic view based on your camera angle. It works in all modes, including if you have reflections enabled and that. And there are a lot more settings where you can vary stereo strength. So if it's too disorientating for you, you can actually reduce it slightly. And the usual stuff like eye separation. You can also increase the field of view or decrease it if you're doing close-in shots and you want to look at something particular in a 3D model. And you just uncheck it, and then, as you can see, bang, the system goes back to normal. The skins we mentioned is a drop-down menu here. It's a modified and new system where if skin designers wish to add a skin to Kirstens, they only have to drop a folder into the skins section with either textures or modified XUI files. And there is a single XML in there. They put the name of the skin that they want in there, and then it will appear in the drop-down list. We might have a look at these later on if we've got time. The other tab here are the visual effects. Now, these differ from that. They're not based on shaders. They're based on OpenCL, which is an unused part of your GPU, which is normally used for compute. So essentially what happens is the frame buffer, or the final buffer before it is presented to the screen, is captured by the effects system, and then kernel drivers or precompiled kernels of OpenCL calculate the effects and then finally pass that modified buffer back to the screen. They are designed primarily to run at about 60 frames per second. Depending on the complexity of the effect and how much calculations involved, that may vary, especially at these higher resolutions like I'm running at the moment where it's ultra wide. But just for instance, you can see here it's instantaneous, black and white, invert, and then you can layer the effects. So unlike a shader where you'd have to load the shader and the shaders would fight with each other, these effects can be stacked one on top of the other without any discernible change to the frame rate. So that tries to peg it at 60 frames per second, and you can do all sorts of funky effects. So if you want a vignette effect and you wish to do a hue rotation, you can do that and change all the colors, the boost and everything else, and pretty much everything works as you would expect it to work. And it's just instantaneously off. New in this beta is motion blur. I find about 0.40 is a comfortable sort of range. Your mileage may vary, of course. And as you can see, I'm panning around the camera and everything around me is blurring. It's movement based and it calculates the motion blur, and it can be more intense or less intense. In fact, if you double this up with depth of field, you get some really unusual sorts of effects. Very cinematic. And like I say, everything is completely variable. So if you want very little motion blur, just a little bit for very fast moving scenes, you can get it. Or if you want to go absolutely mental, you can put it down low and you can literally blur every single frame for some very ghostly effects. Uh, Very similar to some of the effects you'd get in Adobe and similar sorts of programs. They use OpenCL Compute to do similar effects in movies and the such like. So there's a common setup here where you've got the ability to manipulate RGB, boost saturation, contrast, motion blur. Edge glow is quite funny. This one actually just works out, and it's a Sobel replace algorithm, and it will find the edges of everything. It's quite a neat effect. Your atypical night vision, which again, you can scale the noise or descale the noise. The boost and intensity can be altered. And cell shading, which is based primarily off the Borderlands type of code. So you can vary the effect and tune it to your sort of delight and delectation until you get something which fits. And as you can see, it renders perfectly. So there's my house in Borderlands style. Everything, all the textures, the whole lot. And it's 60 frames per second, completely seamless, smooth as you like. So that's the effects. What else have we got? Okay, now we get into the nitty gritty. Down in the core here, as well as the skins, you'll see this, which is the actual underlying S24 engine. So this is a lot of debug settings which would have been in the Linden code, which have been highly modified, plus a lot of extremely low level settings which are unique to the viewer. They're hidden behind this button because as the TPV name suggests, this viewer is highly technical. So some of the stuff in here, if you don't know what you're doing, you can do some really weird and wonderful things to your viewer. Thankfully, I'll just fire it up. You have a reset to defaults. If you should go wrong whilst twiddling around with this stuff and things go a little bit wild or crazy, or you absolutely crash the frame rate because you've touched something you shouldn't have done, then you can reset all of these settings to the factory default, which is a safe bunch of settings, and then tweak again. So the first sort of tab here is, this is unique to S24. So this allows you to override the amount of CPU cores that are available to the client, primarily to do with threading and, in this case, texturing. This actually affects everything. So if, like me, you have a dual CCD AMD chip, and you don't want to rely on the Windows scheduler, you can actually override the CPU count, which is 0 by default for automatic, and suggest to it use the first 12 cores, which is CCD1 or CCD0, sorry, and then it will force the viewer to use the CCD with the 3D cache. It works fantastically. It does require a restart to set, but then you can actually force the amount of cores for texture decode, and then you can suggest minimum cores and maximum cores. The Windows scheduler will still work in the background, but during the boot up of the viewer, There is code in there which will guide the scheduler, and I've found that if you actually force the amount of cores, it will stick to it. The added bonus of this for content creators and the such like is they can actually make their computer act as if it's a 4-core, and see how their content or their build reacts to normal users with lesser systems. I found it to be quite useful myself when building a scene and trying to see what it would look like on, say, a laptop with 4 cores and limited memory. You have the ability to manipulate the CPU in that way. Memory management, okay, by default, usually your VRAM is managed by the system. That's a Linden Lab setting. However, some of these are S24 settings, which have been modified to actually take advantage of larger heap sizes if you have a lot of RAM. And of course, if you've got a very high clock system, you can also restrict the amount of time that is given to the main loop. Let's move on. Let's have a look at rendering core. So a lot of low-level stuff to do with LOD, a lot of low-level stuff to do with draw distance and culling. And for most people, that's covered by just changing draw distance. And this is enough for most everyone. But if you want to mess with this stuff and get down into the low-level stuff, you can do. Impact on your frame rate can vary. Some things are more impactful than others. This is all for fine tuning. Rendering advanced is SSAO. Generally speaking, don't touch this except for the scale. Sometimes I tweak this down to about 200, gains me an extra 5 or 6 frames per second without too much visual loss in detail. The rest of it is just your standard stuff like glow effects. SSR has been heavily modified. So screen space reflections. Obviously, you can see behind me in the floor, we've got reflections. You've got a lot of control over these reflections in the SSR settings. And obviously, the other thing as well is this is impactful on your frame rate. So water SSR is notoriously, shall we say, unoptimized. However, these are specific to S24. You can, in fact, by setting in water iterations to 0, switch off SSR for water and gain yourself a good 10-15 frames per second while still maintaining the reflections on the floor. Okay, shadows. Big one, this one. So unique to S24, we have a cascade shadow system. So this one, there is a cascade shadow system within the official Linden Viewer. However, it does 4 render passes per cascade, and the settings between each area is quite conservative, and shadows has quite an impact on the overall look and feel of things. So let's just see if I can get some shadows going by changing the environment to sunset. So the difference in S24 is the shadow detail. Okay, so one of the things that I like a lot is tweaking shadows. Obviously, we were the first to bring the shadows to Secondlife back in 2008, and the tweaking hasn't stopped. So you'll find that the shadows, even when they're very subtle at sunset, are extremely sharp. Even when you zoom out at very big distances. Now the cascade system, how it works on this is basically when the camera is static like it is now, shadows are actually only rendered once every 4 frames. And this effect is more pronounced at greater distances. In practice, you won't actually notice it. Now, as soon as I move the camera, there is a 6-frame blend-in where it goes from a every 4-frame render to real time again. What this results in is, for the given resolution, extremely higher frame rates when shadows are rendered than they were in the official viewer. It's fully controllable. If you want it to be smoother, if there's a little bit of flicker, you can change it up to 12 frames per second. If you want to, you can go back to the original Linden uh, shadow system with the cascades and just disable it, and it won't make any difference. Again, our shadow resolution scale is set slightly higher than the Linden version. This works a lot nicer, and you can in fact twig this down to about 2. And for fast action scenes, you probably won't notice an awful lot of difference. I like it at about 3 because it gives really nice crisp shadows. Again, lots of stuff to play with here. If things go wrong, don't forget you can reset to default. The lighting system. Okay, the standard stuff. The light count comes straight from advanced graphics settings. None of this is mysterious, including enabling attached lights and such like. Where things start to go a little bit different is down the bottom half here, where this is unique to S24. So local lights, similar to the shadow cascade system, have a priority rendering system, which works in hand with the improved graphics screen sort of stuff. And what this does is it gives the highest priority to everything within 30 meters, and then it slowly blends out as you pull back. So at about 64 meters out, everything gets a medium priority, and then anything that's behind the camera at about 64 meters away does not get calculated or rendered at all. It's a marginal gain, but it is quite an intelligent system, and it's very hard to tell that it's actually active. In fact, you won't tell that it's active. I haven't been able to notice it. Far away lights still get rendered, but it puts more emphasis on lights which are close to you, especially when you've got stuff like projected lights like on the wall here, and you've got local light sources. It will prioritize those light sources over something which is about 30 meters away. It's a nice little tweak. This one here, this one gains us about another 6%, I would say. So basically, if there are any render pools which haven't updated within 30 frames, they're skipped. So, for instance, if there's, let's see, simple objects, simple rendering, you know, the day-to-day stuff, and it hasn't changed, like this speaker hasn't changed for 30 frames per second, the render pool which involves that rendering of that speaker is skipped out. And again, it's instantaneous. You can disable it if you want to. It's a nice little optimization. Textures pretty much says what it is on the 10. All the texture fetching with HTTP if you want to adjust the fetch concurrency, not the decode cores. There are tooltips for a lot of the stuff. Again, don't touch it if you don't know what you're doing. Max texture resolution. This will actually go up to much higher than the default Linden value, but again, it does come with a cost. Networking, again, using threaded networking for plugins. Audio, this is unique to S24, so not unique as such, but showing streaming metadata when audio streams are playing, and a 3-band equalizer, since the Fmod system has a DSP. So it's got spatial audio, and we can, what is unique is you can actually select the audio engine. So if you want the metadata and the 3-band equalizer, you can use Fmod. However, if you want the default Linden plugin system with VLC to support more modern codecs. You can just jump in, and as you can see, these just instantly gray out, and then you restart the viewer and you're using the standard audio engine. It's that simple to switch between the two. In this case, I'm using Fmod for the streaming audio metadata, which again comes up in notifications, and as you can see here, is actually down with the playlist in the local chat, so you can see what's been played on the stream, artists, and the title of the song. Then you've got your sort of experimental settings. So GLTF support is actually based on whether the server sends the flag or not. Not all simulators, or currently not all simulators, send the right flag. It's set in the viewer and it can be enabled without it disabling every relog, hence why it's got the warning if you have to upload or download textures without confirmation, it can cost you LS. So be careful with that one. Planar mirrors, experimental, environmental cube maps. Okay, not so experimental, but it's still in there. If you don't like the little sort of visual cues on the menus and you think that's a little bit too noisy for you, you have the ability to switch it off. Again, you relog and you'll get the standard menus. And then another feature which is exclusive to Kirstens Viewer is a level 1 cache. So as you know, you have in the Secondlife viewer and I'll go to setup, a disk cache. So when you go into a scene and you download the textures, it will cache them to the disk. If you revisit that scene, it will pull those textures off the cache if they're on the local cache, and then present you to the scene, hopefully making your experience in Secondlife a lot smoother and faster. So the RAM cache, disabled by default because it is an advanced setting, adds the ability to allocate a certain amount of your system memory to caching textures. So I'll just go into the advanced menu and show you because it's actually switched on. There's the RAM cache settings there. You can see that it caches objects, which are to do with objects when you do region crossings and such like. Very small amount of cache needed for that. If you were using 64 megabytes, then you've visited a lot of areas, let's put it that way. And you can see that the RAM cache contains 1,344 entries. That's basically all the textures in this scene. Now, what this actually does is, because you can allocate memory to this, essentially it stops constant read writes going to your disk. This batches reads and writes to the disk as and when there's an idle moment in the viewer, which is where you get these dirty measurements from. If I show you, we've got, let's see, 1,344 textures cached in RAM currently. I'm just going to go into my inventory. So we've got 1,344. I'm going to look at a texture. Let's have a look. Let's just open a texture. Gosh, I've got a lot of textures. Okay, there we go. There's a logo texture. Oh, it's gone to 1,345. That is 1,346, 1,347, 1,348. Now, those have been cached to RAM. If I go back to them, you can see they now render instantaneously because they're pulling straight from RAM. Now then, when you log off, it flushes all of these textures back to your disk cache. Okay? And you can see here it says startup optimization, preload hot textures. So it's intelligent enough to know what textures you use the most in terms of frequency and what textures are of the most amount of interest to you. And it takes about 5 seconds at log off, and it will dump those most popular textures down to the disk cache, remember it, and then when you relog, this will allow it to preload those most used textures back into the RAM. Now you can see here that this is an adaptive system. If you go to very busy regions, you've got two pressure or RAM pressure thresholds that you can do, and I can demonstrate this. Let's just teleport to somewhere I haven't been before. Let's go to one of the texture regions where I go for testing. So here we go. We've gone up to 1600, 1700 textures, 1800 textures, and you can see the pressure setting has gone up to 10%. These adaptive memory management sliders allow you to set a soft pressure limit. When it gets up to 75%, it starts to more aggressively look at what textures you've got in RAM and obviously try to put them down onto the disk more aggressively. If you get up to 90% of RAM pressure, it gets very aggressive at sorting out the textures and putting them down to the RAM cache. Essentially what this is the server serving you a texture is your level 3. Your disk cache, which is your local disk cache, is your level 2, and the RAM cache is level 1, each one being more performative than the other. Obviously, if you crash for whatever reason, any textures which were cached in RAM are going to be lost. So you're going to get that performance hit. But it's safe in as much as everyone knows, all of the textures exist on the server without exception. It just means that you'll have to recache those textures on reboot. And that's the RAM cache system. What else have we got in the viewer? Oh yeah, well, let's a few bits and pieces for machinima makers. So we've mentioned stuff in develop and the new consoles and the enhancements there. Obviously, you've got the usual stuff like the built-in AO. We've talked about 3D. Quick chat bar is just if you don't want to open up the entire chat window, you can just quick chat bar like so. Profiles. Let's have a look at profiles. Want to know if a person on your friends list is still got an active account? You can basically look at someone's profile, see if they've got a defunct account, and then you can prune them out of your friends list if they've long since gone. Also, this is all the publicly available server data, which is actually dumped onto the viewer, visible for you, so you can see what in fact you are sharing in terms of your pics or groups with the outside world, or if someone picks off textures off your Secondlife profile, you see that in clubs. This is where it gets those UUIDs from. So there's all the metadata that comes with your profiles. Handy, nice little thing. Advanced sort of readout of everything that's shared with the outside world. The other thing is camera controls. Let's have a look at camera. Here's something. For machinima makers, we've got a composition guide with various, the golden ratio and various other sort of overlays so you can frame your shots. So I want to frame my shot and keep myself in headshot there. So I've got the camera set. That's nice. I'll set it there. And you've got a camera recorder. So I'm just going to hit record on the camera. I'm just going to keep myself in the frame, do a little bit of backwards and forwards, move it around, and then bring it back to the start. There we go, like so. Lovely. Stop that. And then I've set up the shot. I'm going to get myself in position. Okay. And then I'm going to hit play. And then it will automatically move the camera hands-free. So you've just framed the shot and you can play back the shot. And of course, you can do stuff like Control Alt F1, remove the UI, record the footage. The good thing about this is your avatar is actually unlocked from the camera. So you can actually move your avatar on the camera. I can turn around, as you can see, whilst the camera is still playing through. And of course, you can loop it. You can do action shots and then smooth it. It's designed to run again at 60 frames per second. And you can record up to a minute's footage without any problems at all. I'll just stop that. I will get rid of the composition, and then once you're finished with it, this was a 19-second playback. You can just clear the buffer, and you can play back at various speeds. So for instance, if you hit record again, do a nice sweeping shot outwards and then inwards, and then press stop. You can hit play, and you can run it at its normal speed. You can pause, and then you can run it faster and hit play again. And as you can see, you can do much faster sort of camera shots, and it'll just loop and replay until you say stop and you clear the buffer. And that's the advanced camera controls. Now, I know this has been a fairly long sort of video. Just wanted to run through a few bits and pieces. There are more extra features and odds and sods in there. For instance, the statistics bar, this frame rate is based off your actual frame rate, which is served from the GPU. How the viewer handles the CPU, and there's a lot of under the hood stuff as well, which means that it's quite performative in various sort of circumstances. I hope you liked that quick demo. I know this has been quite a long video. It's been, what, 10 or 15 minutes, but just wanted to just run through a few bits and pieces. If you are in World and you see me online, you're more than welcome to say hi. So I'm Kirsten Lee Cinquetti, and this has been a quick demo of the latest beta of Kirstens Viewer S24. Good night and God bless.